Hey class, we are talking about health psychology. Get excited, get healthy. So before we get into the nitty-gritty, let's talk about what stress is. Let's talk about what health is, right? So when you're looking at a healthy person, what traits do you think of when it comes to their health? A lot of us think about health as just the absence of illness, right? A healthy person is somebody who's not in the hospital, who's not sick right now, right? But there are other aspects to health that exist outside of just the biological. So, one, we have the biological aspects, and these are things like what's in your genes, right? Certain people have certain genetic dispositions to certain diseases, Huntington's disease, alcoholism, etc. And then the actual disorders or diseases that you have in your body right now, right? Then we have the psychological aspects, which some of us are more aware of, some of us might not think of as often, which are things like the stresses that might affect you, your lifestyle and behaviors, your beliefs, your thoughts and your actions, right? So the things that you're doing, the things that you're thinking, the things that you're feeling, and how that affects your health. Then we have the social aspect, your environments, your culture, your family and your friends, your sources of social support. Those also can be healthy or non-healthy, right? If you have friends who are really mean to you, right, then that's going to affect your general well-being. But if you have friends who are supportive, who encourage you to have healthy behaviors, right, that is going to affect your health in a positive way. So, all three of these things uh, affect our health overall, but also affect each other. So, for example, if you're feeling sick, you might not spend as much time with your friends, meaning that could affect your psychological health because you're feeling lonely and depressed. And if you're feeling lonely and depressed, that could affect your physical health. You might stay sicker longer. So it's very important to understand how various factors can interplay and affect our health overall. So, a lot of times when we experience some sort of stress, it's a quick thing, right? Let's say you're driving down the highway and a car suddenly cuts in front of you, right? And you slam on the brakes. It's very close. There's no accident, right? You see the car behind you also slam on the brakes. They don't rear end you. Everybody's fine. In that moment, that is the fight or flight response, right? It's a very quick response to a stressor. Your heart's beating, right? You're very stressed. Your focus is very narrow. Everything feels like it might be happening in slow motion. Adrenaline is pumping through your veins, right? That is the fight or flight response. And we've talked about that before. Now, that is just a quick stressor. It happens, it's gone. Now, the researcher cell talked about the general adaptation syndrome, which looks at how stress affects the body in the long term, right? So, the first stage of the general adaptation syndrome is the alarm stage. So, sometimes you just have that quick fight or flight response. But sometimes what can happen is you can experience a stress over a long period of time, right? So there's a difference between being stressed about an upcoming test, right? So you maybe you wake up in the morning and you're like, oh man, I have this test in a couple hours, right? You take the test, you finish it. For 10-ish minutes later, you're still a little stressed about it, wondering how you did, but you move on, right? Now, that is just the alarm stage. You're just feeling that stress for a brief period of time. But if it's your last semester and all four of the classes that you are taking, you need to graduate, right? And every one is just as important as the other one, and you need to get a B or higher, or you won't be able to transfer, right? The entire semester, you're going to be feeling stressed. All 16 weeks of the semester, you're going to be feeling stressed. And so, because of that, your body is dealing with that constant feeling of stress, really releasing cortisol, the stress hormone. So, that is the resistance phase. Your body is saying, hey, okay, we got to be prepared for anything that could happen, right? We might have a test, we might have this assignment. You're constantly feeling stressed. So your body is dealing with that and preparing for stress in the long run. Now, our bodies can't do that forever. So what can sometimes happen is what's called exhaustion. If you've ever been so stressed that you've gotten sick or started getting headaches, or some people get like really nauseous and have a lot of gastrointestinal issues when they get stressed, that's exhaustion. Your body has been working so hard and putting itself under stress that it weakens itself. So that leaves you more vulnerable to getting sick or something like that. So our bodies can handle stress, right? And even stressors that occur for a longer period of time in the long run, our body can handle. But over time, too much stress on our body is a bad thing. So be familiar with the general adaptation syndrome and the three stages: alarm, short term; resistance, long term; and exhaustion. What happens when your body can't take it anymore? So, when we're talking about chronic stress, there's a difference between daily hassles and major life stressors. So, daily hassles are things like, uh, little things like maybe you go to start your car and you're like, oh, the oil light is on. I need to take care of that, right? Little hassle. Or you go to get on your bike and you have a flat tire, right? Or your bike chain is doing something weird. Or, you go to the refrigerator to grab some food, and the thing that you were going to eat is spoiled, or whatever, right? Little things over time add up. But usually daily hassles aren't overwhelming, but when we're dealing with other things, they can be overwhelming, right? So if the only thing stressful in your day is the fact that you need to get an oil change soon, you're probably going to be doing okay. But if you're planning a wedding and a family member just died, and it's your last semester in school, and you're also pregnant, and you're also dealing with, I don't know, those would be a lot of things, right? So if you had those four things to deal with, and then on top of that, you have to get an oil change, that daily hassle is going to affect you more, right? So when we're looking at stress, we have to understand that in we have to understand stress in context, right? One little thing might not be a big deal, but combined with other things, it's going to affect you. That's where you get the idea of like the straw that broke the camel's back. One straw isn't going to do a lot, but if you have a camel that's already carrying a whole bunch, that little straw can do a lot of damage. This is called the Social Readjustment Rating Scale, the SRRS, which was developed by Thomas Holmes and Richard Rahe. And it shows us a bunch of different major life hassles. Now, let's say you just had a change in residence, right? So you're in the process of moving. Moving is pretty stressful. Now, if that were the only thing that you're dealing with, you'd have 20 points. Now, 20 points isn't a lot of stress. It's a fair amount of stress, but it's not a lot, right? Now, if you had a spouse that recently died and you were also incarcerated, and a close family member died, and you were also sick, and you were recently fired from work, probably related to the fact that you were incarcerated, and you had another family member who got really sick, and you were pregnant, and you were dealing with erectile dysfunction, and the you recently like lost a lot of money, maybe you lost a pension. Do people have pensions anymore? Right? And you recently took out a mortgage, and then it foreclosed, right? All these things together are going to add up to a much more significant amount of stress. So according to the SRRS, if you have less than 150 points in stressors, then that's not going to negatively affect your health too much. If you have 150 to 300 points, that means that within the next 2 years, you have a 50% chance of having a major health breakdown. 300 points or more, right? That is when everything just goes to crap. That's going to raise your odds to about 80%. And that's just based off of this statistical prediction model that they developed. So they basically measured all these stresses for people, and then they used the data that they got on these people's exposure to stressors and their health to determine how likely people are to have a negative reaction to certain types of and certain levels of stress. Another thing that affects our level of stress is what's called cognitive hardiness. Cognitive hardiness refers to how resistant you are mentally. So there are three things that we can look at. One is challenge. These are the three C's of cognitive hardiness. So, do you view this as a challenge or just a stressful problem that you have to deal with, right? Viewing something as a challenge that needs to be overcome makes it positive, right? So, if you had to climb a mountain, right, to get you have to walk home, and your normal path is closed off, so for some reason you have to climb a mountain, right? Some of us might go, this really sucks. Others of us might go, this is pretty cool. I've never climbed a mountain to get home. This could be a really fun challenge, right? So, when confronted with issues, how you perceive it is going to affect your level of stress. If you see it as some challenge that can be overcome, right, you'll level up from the experience and gain a lot of experience points, or if you're a nerd, the get out of here, nerds with your RPGs. Get out. Only cool kids in my class, right? But if you see it as a challenge, then it's fun. If you see it as some annoying thing that you now have to deal with, then it's going to be more stressful. The other issue is commitment, right? Your commitment to something is going to affect the amount of stress it brings. If you're dealing with something that you don't really care about, then it's going to feel stressful to you. So for example, if I have to do a 10-page paper for a class that is part of my major and I really love, right? Even though it sucks to write a 10-page paper, because I'm committed to the major, I'm going to be less stressed by it. If I have to do it for a humanities class, and I'm like, I don't know, I don't care about the Greeks and what they were doing, right? Hellenization, what even is that, right? Then I'm going to be more stressed by the paper because I'm less committed to the task. The other thing that affects our cognitive hardiness is control. Your perceived control over a situation is going to affect how stressed you are. This is often referred to as locus of control or loci of control, depending on how many you're talking about. But you want to feel like you have some amount of control in a situation, but not too much, right? Because to some degree, in any situation that we encounter, we have some degree of control. So, for example, let's say back to that 10-page paper, right? Regardless of my level of commitment, there are certain things that I can control and certain things that I can't control. So, if I say, this paper is impossible and I'll never be able to do it, there's no way I can write a 10-page paper, I have no control, right? Now, if I say, hey, well, this paper seems really difficult, but I have 3 weeks to do it. I can reach out to the professor now and get some guidance. I can go to the writing center. I can research, some of the topics early on, and then I can get a rough draft done in 10 days, and then I can maybe get some more feedback. And then by the time it's actually due, I'll have written something at least decent, right? So the amount of control you feel like you have is going to affect the amount of stress that you feel. If you feel like there's nothing you can do in a situation, it's going to be much more stressful, right? And if you overcompensate and you're like, everything is my fault, right? Then you have to acknowledge that there are some things that are not in your control. So knowing how much control you have and being able to exert that control to make change is a very important aspect of cognitive hardiness. So challenge, commitment, and control. So let's talk about dealing with stress. One of the most important things that you can do, going to circle it so many times, put an arrow, is exercise. Exercise is so good for you. And I'm not even like a gym rat. I'm not, hitting 24 or night or morning trying to get swole, but exercise is good for you. Getting up, getting outside, or if you can't get outside, exercising inside, right? Moving your body releases all these wonderful chemicals in your brain that help make you happy. There's this therapeutic technique called behavioral activation, and it's very helpful for people who suffer from depression. One of the hardest things to do when you are depressed is to get up and do things, and this very much is a scientific fake it until you make it. But if you are feeling depressed and you force yourself to get up and do things, so even if it's just walking around the block once, right? Or doing like 10 minutes of exercise or stretching or something like that. Or even if it's not active, like completing a simple task like tidying up some corner of your room or something, right? Moving your body makes you happier and it helps you deal with stress. So, one thing to do if you're feeling stressed is to just move your body. The it's like a thing that we should talk about a lot more, and a lot of people already know this. But one of the best things that you can do to deal with stress is to get up and move your body. The other ways of dealing with stress. One, everybody has a different personality, and we'll talk about personality a little later in the class. But there are type A and type B personalities. Type A personalities are much more high strung. Things need to be done a specific way. They are the people who are like, no, this, right? They get much more stressed, much more easily, right? Uh, then you have type B personalities, which are much more laid back, right? It's going to get done when it gets done. It's fine. Relax, right? People who are naturally more high strung are going to be more stressed regardless of the thing. People who are much more laid back are going to be less stressed. Also, different people have different coping strategies. So, if you encounter a stressful situation, how do you react, right? Sometimes, when a stressful thing happens, some of us are going to immediately feel stressed. And then you decide, like, well, what am I going to do about it? Or some of us just like feel stressed and then we don't do anything about it and we let it ruin our day, right? Some of us might turn to substances, a little self medication, alcohol, smoking, right? Some of us might, whenever we're feeling stressed, go, I'm going to go on a run real quick, right? Back to exercise. So, how you deal with stress, your coping strategies are going to affect how stress affects you. Now, when we're looking at stress, we can look at emotion focused or problem focused coping. Emotion focused coping is when you're dealing with the actual feeling. Problem focused coping is focusing on the thing that is causing the stress. So let's say I get a flat tire, right? I'm driving, I'm late for class, and I get a flat tire. Oh boy, right? So there are two things that are happening. One, I feel stressed. Two, I have a flat tire, right? I have the emotion and the problem. So the first thing that I might do might be call AAA. Or if I know how to fix a flat tire on my own, right? Get out my jack, get on my knees, crank up my car, and replace it, right? Now, that would be problem focused coping. I feel stressed. I have an issue that's causing the stress. I deal with the actual problem. Or I might feel so stressed that I pull my car over to the side and I pull out a little cigarette and I take a little drag and I feel a little bit more calm. And also don't smoke. Smoking is bad for your health. But then I feel better. And then I'm like, okay, now that I feel less stressed, now I'll call AAA or replace the tire myself or just give up and leave my car on the side of the road forever, never drive again, right? So, depending on the situation, you might lean on one or the other. Depending on who you are, some people might lean towards focusing on the emotion first. Others might focus on the problem first. The last thing I want to mention are the different ways that we appraise stress. So, the first thing that happens when you encounter a situation is you make a primary appraisal. So you either determine that something is benign, stressful, or irrelevant. Benign meaning good, stressful meaning stressful, or irrelevant meaning neutral, right? So let's say I'm recording this lecture, and then all of a sudden there's a huge moth in my room, right? Now, that could be a stressful situation. It could not be, right? If I don't care and it just like flies past me and goes towards my light and just like does that like cute thing that moths do where they just like bump against the light bulb over and over, then it's not a big deal, right? It's irrelevant. If I hate flying insects, then it's stressful, right? I'm like, I could pause the recording, or you just hear me like with paper, just trying to get rid of it. I hope you appreciated that beautiful ASMR that just happened. Only the best for you guys. If it's stressful, I'm going to behave that way. If it's benign and I like it, then I'm like, oh, cool, I'm off. That's amazing, right? And I'll be thrilled by it. The secondary appraisal is a judgment of what to do as a result, right? And your capability of doing something. So in the case that it is stressful, do I run out of the room and, call one of my roommates to get rid of the moth? Do I get a jar and a piece of paper and try to catch the moth? Do I just get a can of like aerosol spray and a lighter, and just go like crazy, try to kill the moth, but also maybe light my place on fire, right? The secondary appraisal is once I've determined how I feel about the stressor. Is it good? Is it bad? Does it not matter to me at all? What do I do about it? So let's talk about health. It's important. When you talk about health, we can talk about weight, we could talk about sex, we could talk about drugs. We're going to talk about all three. Now, when we're talking about weight, uh, our culture, Western culture, is very obsessed with skinniness, which, as you might imagine, leads to lots of things like eating disorders, which I believe we're going to talk about in just a moment. But the thing is, there's a range of weights that you can have based off of your height, and there's what is considered normal and healthy weight, and then there are extreme lows and extreme highs, right? Just because you have fat on your body does not necessarily mean that you are unhealthy, right? No one number is an objective measure of how healthy you are. You can be skinnier than average and be healthier than somebody who is super muscular, right? So when we're talking about weight, uh, in our culture, it's a huge thing, but it actually doesn't matter. Your aesthetic isn't necessarily a determination of your health. Now, a lot of you know this, but it's so prevalent in our media that it feels sometimes hard to believe it, especially now. So I remember 10, 15 years ago talking about the media representations of beauty and airbrushing, and how who you see on like a picture ad or a commercial isn't representative of how that person actually looks in real life, but that's what we aspire to be. And it was bad 10 and 15 years ago. Now, I'm not sure if you've noticed this, but it's significantly worse because the shapes of bodies that you see, in addition to just the fact that like you can get surgical implants to make all parts of your body look certain ways, but in addition to that, people will also Photoshop their bodies and proportions to make them look a specific way. So you see this picture of somebody, and then you go, well, I don't look like that. So obviously there's something wrong with me, when the person who you're jealous of doesn't actually even look like that. So Western society has created this very unhealthy culture around eating and weight, right? The two extremes of American culture are extreme obesity, which is just eat whatever you want. Doesn't matter how it's made, doesn't matter the calories, whatever. Just eat, 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 eat. Be a consumer, and then eat nothing, never eat anything. Food is bad. You have to be skinny, but also muscular. You have to have like a size 0 waist and a size 44 bust, right? That is how bodies work. So the we have an issue, and it's a very big social issue. There are also issues around sex and drugs, and we'll talk about those more in depth next. Let's talk about sex. Imagine me putting a chair down, flipping it around, and sitting in it backwards, putting on a baseball hat. Not Professor Thompson right now. It's me, Professor Jeff. I'm just a kid like you. I'm sorry, I can't. Uh, okay. Sex is a thing that people do. You guys have heard of sex, maybe. And it's another thing that we just don't talk about. Now, this is the thing. Some people have sex, right? And we don't talk about all the, like, uh, name like five contraceptive measures. See if you could just name five off the top of your head. In case you don't know what a contraceptive measure is, it's a thing that you use to prevent yourself or your partner from getting pregnant. Sometimes they also have the added bonus of preventing the spread of STDs or STIs. So, can you think of five? Condoms, diaphragms, dental dams, foams, right? Let's see what else. IUDs, what else? Oh, the little injections, the pill. So did I get, is that seven, right? And there are more than that, but we don't really, there are female condoms. People never talk about those. And the thing is, there are lots of things about sex that we just don't talk about, and they should be talked about. One is what is considered normal or healthy sexual behavior, right? Different people have a kind of number in their head about like how much sex is too much or too little. And it doesn't matter from a psychological perspective, right? If you have a religion that you prescribe to, then you're going to have your own rules that you are free to follow, right? But from a psychological perspective, there's no real like you have to have had or you shouldn't have, right? We're looking at what is healthy for the person. And just by nature, some people are going to have more, some people are going to have less. Now, when we're looking at any type of clinically significant behavior, something that you might go, ooh, this is a problematic behavior, we want to see if it's causing distress or impairment, right? So there are some people who are what we would consider sex addicts who put themselves at risk in order to engage in sexual behavior. So if your pursuit of sexual behavior is so intense that it's causing you harm. So some people might engage in behaviors that are, they're doing it so much that parts of their body are rubbed raw, right? That would be problematic. That's causing distress. Or they're going to dangerous lengths to find sexual partners, right? Those types of things are things that we would say, okay, this is starting to become problematic. But if you're being safe and you're being healthy, right, and you're being mature and respectful, and there's lots of consent going around, then from a psychological perspective, we're not really that worried, right? You might have noticed this little chart that shows all these different STDs and your chances of getting them from one unprotected sexual act. This is specifically based off of heterosexual couplings, but the a lot of people engage in sexual behavior without a condom or dental dam or any other type of protection. And it's something to think about. People don't talk about their sexual histories before engaging in sexual behavior. So if you learn anything from me sitting in this chair backwards with a baseball cap on my head, talking to you eye to eye, right? It's that sex, if that is a behavior that you enjoy engaging in, either with a romantic partner or casually, is still an important aspect of your health. And as you would think about anything involving your health, what you put into your body, that can apply to food or sex, or the amount of exercise that you're getting, your prevention of certain types of diseases. Think about what is best for you, not only in the present moment, but in the long run. From a psychological perspective, not a moralistic one, make sure you're making healthy decisions for yourself. And that's my TED Talk about sex. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you learned something, and I hope that you have a safe time. This is weird. Moving on to the next. Whew, okay, well, we're done with sex. Now we can talk about something. Oh no, drugs. Oh no. So same thing with drugs, right? From a psychological perspective, from like a therapeutic perspective, drug use, and we've talked about this before, isn't necessarily an alarming behavior. Now, obviously, if I'm a therapist and a client of mine says, "Oh yeah, I tried heroin yesterday. It was really great," I might go, "This might be something that I keep in mind because if they continue trying heroin, then that might lead into an addiction because heroin is a very addictive substance. Also, last time I checked, it's illegal. So you're dealing with potential addiction and also potential trouble with the law, right? Not that I, the therapist, would report the law, but I'm worried about my client getting caught up in, a illegal behavior. So drug use isn't bad. Now, the health issues are, as we've talked about before, addiction, right? And abuse. So if you're seeing these long-term issues start to come into play, or if you're meeting somebody for the first time and they're dealing with these issues, then it's something that you need to look at. Even if it's something like marijuana, right? We are in California, and so marijuana is approved for recreational use. So as long as you are 21, you can use it as much as you want. And as long as you're not doing any behaviors that you shouldn't be under the influence of it, you are fine. But that's a legal standpoint. If you're doing it every day, and it becomes a consistent pattern and you start to see decreases in your ability to function as a result of its use, right? If more of your time is spent acquiring it and making sure that you have it, if it starts to become an addiction, if it's starting to affect your relationships, then it becomes a problem. So when we talk about drugs, we often focus on how like the most severe and intensive drugs uh, can sorry, I just got a text right uh, right as I was mid thought. But we look at how some of the most like extreme drugs are problematic, and most of us can just be like, yeah, meth is probably like a drug that you should stay away from. But also drugs that we consider normal can be problematic, and maybe you know people who have been using a substance and their use of it has gotten out of hand. So we can see that when we're looking at healthy behaviors, there's nothing wrong with having, getting home from a long day of work, smoking a cigarette, or smoking a bowl, or having a nice glass of wine, right? It's now the long-term use of those things is going to negatively affect you, right? All those things can be associated with cancer or other positive or other possible negative effects to your body, right? So you want to do things in moderation, but uh, aside from like the physical, we can look at like how the consistent use of those things might be an issue. Occasional use, fine, right? Occasionally getting a little crazy, and getting super drunk at a party, and then having your friend take your keys and give you a ride home, and then they take you to get your car in the morning, whatever, that type of thing, that's fine. You're not hurting anyone. If you're getting that drunk all the time, then it's a problem. This has been another TED Talk from Jeff Thompson. I hope you enjoy me morally shaking my finger at you. But that is the whole point of psychology. We're not judging people, right? The only judgments that we make are when behaviors are causing distress to the individual or social or occupational impairment. So if you are dealing with something and it's giving you problems, or if it's causing problems with your ability to do your job, or go to school, or have relationships with other people, that is when psychology and psychologists get involved. So, because of Western standards of beauty and our weird relationship to food, a very uniquely Western disease has emerged over the past several years, and those are eating disorders. So, uh, we'll talk about them. I had a Kenyan uh, professor in grad school who could not understand eating disorders from a cultural perspective because he was like, if you have food, why wouldn't you eat it, right? So eating disorders do come from our Western relationship to food and eating. So you may have heard of anorexia nervosa before. Anorexia nervosa is specifically related to this obsession with maintaining a low body weight. This low body weight would be 85% of what is considered normal for your body weight. So for me, I'm not sure if you have seen me because this is online, but I'm a generally skinny-ish guy. If I lost about 20 pounds, 15 to 20, that would be 85% of what would be healthy body weight. So this is a very extreme reduction of weight. And even no matter how skinny this person becomes, they experience what's called body dysmorphia, where even though they might be skinnier than you, they might look in the mirror and say, I'm so fat, right? They can't see how skinny they actually are. So a lot of this is with this. There's this intense fear of gaining weight or becoming fat. So they restrict their food intake or engage in behaviors uh, like extreme like exercise or taking diet pills or they might use enemas or things that like flush their system out quickly in order to make sure that they are getting as little nutrition as possible. Aside from the issues involved with their weight, you can see a lot of really negative side effects. Women who who are dealing with anorexia could experience what's called amenorrhea, which is when the menstrual cycle ceases, and this can lead to death because our bodies need nutrients in order for us to survive. And if you're starving yourself and you're not getting the proper nutrition, you can see a lot of negative uh, uh, side effects in the body. And of course, the worst case scenario is somebody dying from this disease. Bulimia nervosa is another eating disorder. It's not the same because you're not seeing that same obsession with maintaining a low body weight, but there is a lot of negative self-evaluation due to body shape and body weight. So what you're seeing in bulimia nervosa is reoccurrent episodes of binging. So a binge is any excessive indulgence in something, right? You might remember that we talked about binge drinking when we were talking about alcohol use a long time ago. Binge eating would be a portion that is significantly larger than what you would normally eat. So maybe if I go to my favorite Thai food restaurant, I usually get one entree. If I'm binging, maybe I get two entrees and a couple of apps, right? Now, sometimes we binge. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of Thanksgiving, but that's like a big. Have you guys heard of Thanksgiving? Uh, so it's a holiday in which we like eat so much, right? We make so much food and we just shove our faces with food. That's not bulimia nervosa. That's binging, but it's not to the degree that you would consider it. Oh well, I ate so much. I have bulimia nervosa. You have to one see a frequent pattern of binging, but then you also need to see inappropriate compensatory behavior in order to prevent weight gain. So I binge and then I might purge. So purging would be something like vomiting, or I might engage in excessive exercise. Now, the key thing here is inappropriate, right? If I decide to, have a few Oreos after recording this lecture, and then tomorrow I'm like, ugh, I had like 7 Oreos. I should probably give myself another lap around the block today. That's not inappropriate. Uh, I'm I increase my caloric intake. I'm increasing my exercise. Now, if I jog 3 extra miles for those cookies, that might be inappropriate, right? So I'm overdoing my compensatory behavior. So that's the important thing. It's inappropriate compensatory behavior. And also, this disease cannot occur during episodes of anorexia nervosa. So if you saw somebody restricting and also purging, you wouldn't say that they have bulimia and anorexia. You would just say that they have anorexia or bulimia, depending on whether they fit better in one category or the other. And then we have binge eating disorder. So you'll see episodes of binge eating with no compensatory behavior. Uh, when the person is engaging in binge eating, they have marked stress around the fact that they're eating. And this has to occur at least once a week for 3 months. So again, if it just happens on like Memorial Day and Thanksgiving and Christmas, right, then it's not binge eating disorder. But if it's happening once a week for a period of 3 months, so basically 12 times in a 3 month period, that would meet the criteria for binge eating disorder. And of course, if you see that they better fit the symptoms for bulimia nervosa, so there's compensatory behavior or anorexia nervosa, that obsession with low body weight, and that body dysmorphia, then you would give them that diagnosis, not binge eating disorder. So let's end on a positive note. And there's nothing more positive than positive psychology. Developed by Martin Seligman, positive psychology is kind of a resistance to psychology as it was treated for years up to this point. Essentially, psychology comes from the disease model of medicine, which is find the symptoms, diagnose the disease, and then reduce the symptoms, right? If somebody is depressed, fix the depression. If somebody's anxious, fix the anxiety. If somebody is seeing hallucinations and having delusions, we fix it, right? But the absence of disease doesn't necessarily mean that you are happy or healthy. So Martin Seligman was like, let's see if there's more that we can do. So positive psychology focuses on positive emotions and pleasure, engagement in life, and meaningful living, right? So what do you really want to do with your life? What are goals? What are your strengths, right? When we're talking about mental illness, we often focus on the weaknesses of the illness, but there are also strengths to these things, right? Schizophrenia and creativity are related. Your ability to see like, I have a deck of cards in front of me, and then I'm like, oh, what if these decks of cards were talking to, what if these different cards were talking to one another, and they had like different personalities, and the hearts went to war with like the diamonds, right? And if that's creativity. Now, if I actually thought that the different cards were talking, going to war, that would be psychosis, right? It's a very fine line. If you've probably heard of Kanye West, right? He has bipolar disorder. He refers to bipolar disorder as his superpower because even though he has these sometimes very severe manic episodes, he gains a lot of creativity from those moments. So, not to say if you have a disorder, you should leave it untreated so you can be creative. But a lot of people gain a lot of insight into themselves and their abilities from their struggles with mental illness. So really understanding that like side of it, right? Depression comes from attachment. Something Losing something can't make you feel sad if you weren't attached to it in the first place, right? Anxiety, you want certain in certain jobs people to have some level of anxiety, because if it's a thing that involves planning for possible situations, you want somebody who has a degree of anxiety because they're going to think of every possible thing that can go wrong. So positive psychology really helps us focus on, okay, well, yes, it's good to get to reduce the negative aspects of mental illness, but what are the positive aspects of ourselves that we can work on and we can grow, right? So I really like this chart because it's 8 positive psychology strategies coaches can use to help clients thrive, but there are only 6 listed on there. So I wasn't going to use it, but then I was like, no, this is a beautiful way to end this. So identifying and developing strengths and unique talents, building a sense of hope and optimism into your perspective, right? Things will be okay. If you think about like everything that you've dealt with in the past, right? You've survived it. You didn't think you would at the time, but you have. And even though it might not have turned out the way that you thought it would have, and oftentimes in life it doesn't, right? You survived. And you can learn a lesson from that and you can do better next time, right? Encourage building and maintaining healthy, positive relationships. The people around you, we've talked about the social aspect of health, they are so responsible for how well you do. So if you are surrounding yourself with people who tear you down and make you feel less than, then you're going to feel less than. If you surround yourself with people who are emotionally supportive and lift you up, then you're going to be lifted up. So your social support is so important. Then goal setting and goal striving, right? How are you setting goals? There are goals called SMART goals, which are specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time bound. And so sometimes when we set a goal for ourselves, we'll say something like, oh, I want to be healthier, right? Or I want to be more successful, or I want to be happier, right? But we don't really get into the specifics of what we're looking for. So there's a difference between I want to be healthier and I want to gain 8 pounds of muscle within the next 6 months, right? Is that possible? I don't know how that works. But that would also be the thing. Like, is it realistic to gain 8 pounds of muscle in the next 6 months? Is that something that I can realistically do, right? If I set an unrealistic goal for myself, or something that's not attainable, or something that's not specific, then I don't know whether or not I've actually attained that goal. Or I'll set a goal that's so impossible that I feel terrible when I haven't achieved it, right? If I say I want to be a famous movie star in the next 6 months, It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen, right? But if I say I want to be a successful actor and have a strong like YouTube following, then if I give myself the next 2, 3 years to do that, and I have specific goals for myself, I can probably do that, right? Then we cultivate happiness, gratitude, and well being, right? Learning to be thankful for what you have. There's nothing wrong with wanting more, but sometimes what we do is we never stop to be thankful for the what we've accomplished thus far, right? For example, some of you are going to be graduating maybe this year or next year or the year following, and you might be thinking about the next step. And you might be thinking, okay, well, next comes undergrad, then grad school, then I have to figure out my career or blah, 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 right? But take the time to actually enjoy the fact that you got through it, right? Even at the end of the semester, which is coming up very soon, you might be going, okay, well, now I have to worry about summer. Now I have to, fall's coming up. Did I get enrolled in the classes? I'm going to have to reach out to the. No, take the time to go, I did this, right? I survived this semester and I should be so proud of myself. Even if you didn't do as well as you wanted to, the fact that you did it is still an accomplishment. And again, learning to savor each positive moment, right? Really, the only thing that we have is the present. But we often deal with the past and we're focused on all the things that we could have done better. But in the moment, you didn't know, right? Or you did know, but then you're like, well, let's try it anyway. And then you reinforce that learning. So you did the best that you could have in the past. Now you're doing better. So, but now is the only time that you can actually experience the joy that life has to offer. So when something happens, allow yourself to savor it, allow yourself to appreciate it, right? Because the present moment is all we have. At some point in the future, that'll be the present. But right now, this is all you have, right? So, hey, you finished the lecture, you learned a little bit more than you did however long ago this lecture started. You're more educated, you're wiser. Be proud of yourself. That is a positive note to end on. I should do this more often. This is fun. I'm really proud of myself. Good job, me. I'm good at teaching. Wow. I'm gonna go hang out with my friends. Or just send somebody a text and tell them that I did a lecture. Yeah, I have some pretty good friends.